All right, so one more talk on the theme of sustainability before the break. This talk will be given by the lead of the team that is working on affordable net zero housing and transportation solutions, Professor Leigh Raymond from the Political Science Department in the College of Liberal Arts.
So I'm excited to come and talk about this project with all of you. So this picture here, believe it or not, actually only shows about 2/3 of our project team. So the first real challenge that we had in pursuing our big idea was really actually where to find a room on campus where all of these people could actually meet in a productive sort of way. So we ended up having this picture taken in really this giant workshop hangar that Jim Braun, who's in the middle of that picture at the Center for High Performance Buildings, has, right? Because that was the only place where we would all fit, basically, for the camera. So, so that really does show another sort of challenge, a big challenge of interdisciplinary work. And there are really people from all over campus in this project, right? Multiple engineering departments, economics, technology, several liberal arts departments as well. So, which has been a really exciting part of approaching what is really a very multifaceted problem, which is this question about how to improve affordable housing and make it sort of a leader in sustainability and sort of cutting edge building technologies in general. And so really the vision behind this project, going back now, it seems like a million years, I guess it was maybe 3 years ago or something like that, Tomas, where we first started talking about this, was to really imagine a world where affordable housing was actually on the cutting edge of the latest ideas in, again, sort of high-performance buildings, as my engineering colleagues call it, on-site renewable energy technology, and also resident engagement in energy usage. So really thinking about affordable housing, not as sort of, as it usually is, the last place that we bring technology and other sort of innovations to bear, but actually the first place where we can do some of these things. And by doing that, we can actually address a number of really critical problems that I'll mention in the next slide. But most importantly, we can make quality of life improvements that are really quite substantial for the residents of those buildings, right? So the working families across the state and really across the country who rely on this kind of housing can have a higher quality of life and also, frankly, more disposable income by leveraging some of the technologies that this team has really been working on. And at the same time, doing that in a way that we really minimize the environmental impact of these buildings by having no net demand from the electricity grid for them. So I could give you lots and lots of numbers. I'll stick with just a few. There's lots of reasons why this is important. Maybe the first one that I like to lead with is that working families, low-income families, as a percentage, spend 3 times as much of their annual income on energy costs as the rest of us. So this is actually a really pressing economic issue. They typically have really severe challenges in terms of finding good, affordable, reliable transportation options. And at the same time, that kind of affordable housing often lacks many really important quality of life amenities that also are central to improving their well-being. And so just as an example of this energy problem, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which operates some, but certainly not all, affordable housing in the US, spends over $5 billion a year just on energy costs. So if we find a way to make these buildings more efficient, we can actually really also be quite, make some very substantial improvements, right, in terms of the cost of those buildings, both for the residents and also for the agencies that are involved in offering this housing. And at the same time, as I like to point out to my undergraduate environmental policy students, we're really excited in the US about how much progress we've made on improving air quality outside, and that's true. We should really celebrate that. But we spend 90 or 93% of our time indoors, where we have a much less sort of ability to improve air quality. So thinking about ways to design buildings like the lines of this project that will also improve, right, that indoor sort of quality of life is something that we're interested in. And then also buildings are, we now know more and more, a really important part of the air pollution and the climate change problem. So again, 20% of all of the US carbon emissions come from the residential sector, and almost 30% of all of the greenhouse gas emissions from the US come from the transportation sector. So 2 of the areas that this project is really trying to address. So that all sounds exciting. So we said to ourselves and to our partners, who I'll talk about in a minute, so what's the problem here? Why is this not something that's already happening? Why isn't the affordable housing sector already making strides in this area? And what we've really discovered, and we've actually really, I think, refined our vision as we have now been involved in this project for the last couple of years, is that developers in the affordable housing sector are actually very sympathetic to these goals and want to produce high quality of life, low environmental impact buildings for their residents. But they lack the tools and sort of even the models for how to do that, on everything from the resident engagement side to different options for producing energy on site to different ways of using smart technology to, again, make resident energy use as efficient as possible. And so those tools are really missing, and we feel like with our partners that's been sort of the key for our project, is how do we develop and then actually test some of those tools to allow these ideas to move forward. So again, as I just said, really, as we've continued to work on this project, although the main deliverable has really been to be a partner with the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority and also with this energy and environmental consulting firm in Indianapolis, very entrepreneurial energy systems network, in creating 4 new affordable housing developments in Indiana, where we're supplying some of the technology and technological expertise for those developers in terms of how to design and construct those to be as close to net zero as possible. The longer term vision is to also be building, right, a set of tools that developers beyond these 4 can use to hopefully transform this sector much more broadly. So the way we really went about approaching our team is bringing expertise in a few important areas. On the one hand, people who are really have a deep expertise in understanding energy systems, including on-site, the delivery of on-site sort of renewable energy. Also, people who are thinking a lot about sort of using these new innovations in terms of sort of smart home technology and also smart vehicle technologies to improve the efficiency of the use of both of those. And then finally, the sort of social scientists in the group who are thinking about people and how do the people interact with all these technologies and what is it that incentivizes me, or what are the reasons why I do or do not use energy in the ways that I do, and how do we make sure that we're improving the quality of life, right, for those residents as we're thinking about these different technological innovations. And so that's really the goal behind the project in that respect. So I love this picture because I took it, but this is our pilot project that we have now been working on for more than a year. So this is a beautiful development that one of our private developers, BWI Industries, has already put together in Indianapolis. This is Overlook with its wonderful mural there on the left-hand side. So this was formerly, I think, like a chocolate factory or something that Gary Hobbs, the leader of BWI, who's a real visionary, saw as a potentially, it was a sort of, it was a big kind of, empty abandoned building, sort of a blight on the neighborhood, and really saw a vision for turning that into mixed-use housing for residents. And so when we started working with Gary on a different project for this, he also said, hey, why don't you come down and look at Overlook? It's already there, and maybe we can integrate some of the ideas that you're talking about into that existing facility. So in 2018, we did quite a bit of work installing, basically, as you see here, smart thermostats in every unit, as well as smart smart circuit boards, essentially, right? So that we could monitor and measure energy consumption all the way down to the 5-minute interval, actually, right? And across a wide range of uses on that circuit board. So really pretty remarkable source of data that we were able to get by going into that building and working with the residents and the management to install this technology that we'll then be using in some of the other developments as well. So here's just some of the kind of data that we're getting. This is just energy consumption by unit in the building. 2 things I hope will jump out at you from this. One is that it's a hell of a lot of data, so that's really notable and really allows us to understand much more deeply how residents are using energy and for what purposes. Because again, right, we can see who's using energy for heating versus the water heater versus lighting, cooling, et cetera, right? And also, maybe even more importantly, that there is even more variation in energy consumption among these units than we expected. So that's a very dramatic range of energy consumption for people in the same building. Some of that clearly can be explained by, again, who's on an exterior wall, who's in an interior location, and things like that, 1 bedroom versus 2 bedroom. But there's still clearly a tremendous amount of variation in terms of how people are using energy, which means that there's a great deal of opportunity to work with residents to think about what is or is not the most effective way for them to use energy, to make themselves comfortable and also reduce the total energy consumption of that building. Okay, so one of the ways that the social science and technology team has really been working on engaging residents is through smart home technology that uses voice interactions. Not my cup of tea, but I know a lot of people really prefer to interact with their home this way by talking to Alexa. So we have a group that is thinking about ways to allow residents to talk to Alexa, and which we would supply, right? And say, so Alexa, what is my heating energy usage today? How am I doing in terms of the group goals that we have for the facility this month? And get a quick, simple, convenient sort of answer, right, from that technology. Or alternatively, potentially get a more detailed answer if that's what the resident wants, right? But really having that be something that's available to the resident. The other way that we have been working and engaging quite a bit with the existing work on factors that shape energy consumption is by thinking about a customized app that people can use on their phones that will give them personal information about their energy use that month, that year, that day. So that's what this particular image is showing you. So here's how much energy you've been using this month, and here's where you've been using it, basically, right? And a little bit of, again, a personalized suggestion using that smart home technology to tell the resident some patterns that that we see in that data that might allow them to find a way to reduce their energy consumption. And then this is the part that I'm a little bit more involved in, also giving the resident some of this kind of community level feedback, right? So here is in general how your consumption compares to other residents in the building. Here's how we're doing as a group towards the sort of the collective goal that we've set for that residence, and then thinking about ways to illustrate that with that right-hand panel right there. So this raises some really intriguing questions that are at the heart of some of the work that I do, which is really, why do people cooperate towards these kinds of collective goals? It's a big question in political science in general. Why do people cooperate? And in particular, what makes them cooperate towards, say, like an energy conservation goal? And one of the most robust answers to that is, well, a good way to get people to cooperate is to make sure that you punish them a little bit if they don't cooperate. But in this context, that's a very bad option. We really cannot have developers telling residents that you're going to get penalized. This has to be a voluntary and sort of a positive kind of experience for the residents, especially in an affordable housing context. So we have been able to show, at least in a limited way, that just in an experimental lab setting, giving individuals the incentive of a modest reward for meeting a group sort of target does in fact significantly affect the level of cooperation or contribution, right? So you can see as people as we move past announcing to the group that they've now met their sort of commitment to in that game, that those contributions drop off significantly, right? So clearly that award is having some impact on people's behaviors here. And so that's something that will then translate into the field as we go into places like Posterity Heights. This is the first of the new affordable housing developments that just finished construction this fall. This is in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So unlike Overlook, because this is being built from scratch, this has on-site solar electricity generation. We were very involved in a lot of the energy modeling for the building of this development from the beginning, and also includes that set of electric vehicles for car sharing with those residents. So just a few final things about tools. We've really, again, learned in talking with the different developers at the different locations that the transportation needs of residents in an urban Indiana development are very different than for residents in, for example, that development in Fort Wayne. And so while the original vision of the sort of project was to think about car sharing and electric car sharing in every context, it became pretty clear that that didn't always make sense. So we've actually done a lot of work on that side in terms of really thinking about identifying what is it that a given community needs in terms of transportation needs, and where that is a shared vehicle fleet, an electric vehicle fleet, thinking carefully about different algorithms for allowing for sort of, again, the most efficient use of those vehicles, basically, right, through different kinds of pricing strategies that, again, minimize the cost to the residents, but also make sure that those vehicles are used as efficiently as possible. So the transportation team is really working on creating, again, a tool that is then something that other developers could use to do some of that same kind of car sharing management. Similarly, instead of our doing a lot of very intensive energy modeling consulting with developers, it became really clear that developers are very interested in being able to do more of that work themselves. There are very complicated energy modeling software that's out there, but the vision that we have is to have a web-based sort of more simplified sort of first cut at energy modeling that would allow a developer to simply try out a few ideas. And so that's, again, something that we've been working on as well. And so this is just a quick sort of prototype of what that might look like. And so really, in the end, the hope is that those tools that we develop through these 4 affordable housing developments that are now either underway or planned for construction in Indiana in the next year or two. Will really provide a model for, through those contacts with the Housing Authority and through our other partners at ESN, to then allow other affordable housing developers, right, to see that this is something you can do and still basically, right, have a profitable enterprise, have happier residents, and also have, again, a vastly reduced impact on the environment, which is something that everybody who's involved, the Housing Authority, the Purdue faculty and students, and also the our partners at ESN are really continue to be very excited about. So again, thanks to the Discovery Park for really helping to make Purdue be a part of this project. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leigh. Great. Questions? Gary? Okay, so there's two more over there. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm curious how the relationship between the HUD and government agencies is going with this project and what you see for the future of that.
Good question. So that HUD figure is useful because it gives a sense of scale, but we are not working with HUD. So one of the things about affordable housing, right, is that it's a really complicated world. So some of that housing is run by HUD, but then a lot of it is actually run by these state, right, housing authorities. And so really our main institutional partner is the IHCDA. So Jake Sipe, who's the director of that, has been, I mean, this project wouldn't exist without his vision for really wanting this to happen. So, and it's actually even more complicated because a lot of these developments, the HUD developments tend to be owned by government. So these developments are not, they're owned by those developers, right? So what Jake is doing at the Housing Authority is he basically puts contracts out to bid where he can offer tax credits. And again, I could go on and on about this, right? Because I've learned a lot about affordable housing policy in doing this project. And so then these developers like Gary at BWI have to bid on these low-income housing tax credits, right? Which is what allows them to then raise the capital to create these affordable housing developments, right? So at this point, our main focus has been on that, again, LI, low-income housing tax credit, LIHTC, sort of, which is a huge market actually. The vast majority of affordable housing is built that way in the US, and that's where we're starting. But a lot of these principles should work for a whole range of, right, different income brackets, and affordable housing also really runs a wide gamut, and even our 4 developments are at sort of different income points, right, in terms of, you just have to be below median income basically to have a development be eligible for this kind of thing, so.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the very good work you're doing. My question is about use of materials that has got a high insulation capacity. Well, what I see you doing is managing energy consumption, working with the stakeholders. Did you think about, or did you consider using high insulation capacity materials for construction with the developers? Well, the developers are using some specific types of materials, which I know are not that good in insulating. Well, they're trying to improve the insulation using foams, insulating materials. Did you consider, for instance, stabilized soil blocks as construction material? Because they have got a very high insulation capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Have you considered that type of solutions? That's my question.
Okay, so if I understand your question, right, you're asking about a specific sort of insulation technology, right, which is, right, using soil blocks, right, as the building insulation. So I cannot speak to every building material that has been considered, right? And every development is different. And so at some level, we're providing advice, right, to the developers. And they're the ones who have to, at the end of the day, make this whole thing work, right, with their budget. So we had an interesting experience with one of the developers who was very ambitious and sort of got a little bit ahead of themselves and then realized that they hadn't thought carefully enough. And that's part of where this tool is sort of coming in, right, about the trade-offs between their construction costs, right? And again, the ROI here is important, right? the sense was that they could probably get that money back, but they hadn't really thought as carefully as they should have about the time frame that they needed to do that. So I think that I cannot say, I do not believe that any of these projects at present are considering that kind of building installation, but I think there's no reason why they wouldn't. It's really a matter of, again, deferring to the expertise of people, again, like Jim Braun and also Panayota Karava, but especially Jim, because this is really his area, right, in the Center for High Performance Buildings. So if it's a building structure that's a way of, again, creating, again, better insulation at lower cost or with less environmental effect, he's probably aware of it, and it's certainly something that, I mean, we'll talk to developers about anything, right? And so they also come to us with their own ideas about what they want to do, 1-story, 2-story, right? How they want to sort of build things. And so I think that's been a part of the process too, right? Is learning how to have that dialogue. But yeah, I don't see why you couldn't. Again, I'm not an engineer, right? But I don't see why you couldn't have that kind of technology be a part of the conversation. And that's part of where this tool can sort of expand to allow developers to see what that would look like. So.
You know, I think the beauty of these kinds of projects, again, the thing that strikes me so much about this is the convergence of, you know, political scientists and social scientists with engineers and computer scientists and so on. And you really can provide solutions that are so much more comprehensive this way. So, Gary, you had a question there?
So, in reference to the social aspect, I mean, behavior change has a lot to do with energy consumption. And so, my question is, did you engage in any type of, you know, awareness building or on energy usage, and was that addressed to the entire family? Because, you know, kids really consume a lot of energy in reality, and if you're not engaging the whole family, it would seem to me that you wouldn't have success. So, do you have any response to that?
Yeah. Great point. So at this stage, to speak about that exact question, so really at this point in the field, so the data I showed you about people contributing, right, that was just a lab experiment. So we're not yet giving people incentives in the field about energy consumption. We're getting very close to that point, but because they're, again, it was really only last year that we were able to even get some of these devices into the Overlook development. At this point, we focused mostly on just making the residents comfortable with what is this that's being installed. Because one of the interesting things about Overlook is that it was already there, right? And people were living there. So we had to basically go in and install these thermostats and again, adapt their circuit boards, right, while they're living there, right? So they're very aware. And again, people were very friendly, but also had a lot of questions. So what is this? How does this work? What are you doing, right? Yeah. So we had to spend a lot of time getting people comfortable with what's happening with this data, right? That they're not being identified, that this is not being used, right, to change their, again, because some of them pay their electricity bills, some don't. It's actually an interesting experiment that way. As we then move into, right, the phase of giving feedback, we already have talked a lot about how we're going to have to, right, address those exact questions, right, about who actually is setting the thermostat, right, who's talking to Alexa, right, who's doing those things. And so that's an important part of the challenge. Yep.
Victor, go ahead.
Thank you. Yep. Leigh, thank you for your presentation. Really interesting how we can help families to work better in energy consumption and be more aware of what we use. I have a question about, you focus primarily on the big housing and the many apartment units and urban housing. Have you talked about with your team about family housing units, models with net zero possibilities, and also more rural areas? I'm thinking internationally, right? A lot of the families and families with difficulties are in those rural areas where there's very little or none state contributions or help in affordable housing type of thing. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you for that question. So we did, so the answer is yes. So we actually spent quite a bit of time, several of us went on a big tour of a lot of, because Jake is already the guy at, our partner at IHCDA, was already saying, hey, now I have an opportunity to do a lot of the same kind of work for our much more rural, right, developments, right, there, and there's quite a bit of, right, rural affordable housing in Indiana as well. Very different, much more dispersed, right, has a whole different set of problems. So we did spend a whole day with him going and looking at those buildings, and again, I think Tomas might remember, we even talked with him about this, really exciting opportunities, and our hands are so full just with these 4, right, developments that we're trying to make sure that they happen. That this is an area that I think clearly you would want to go in this direction. That's a very logical next step. And then again, same thing for talking about international, right? All these questions are even more acute at an international context. And so that would also be a really logical thing to do, yeah. So at this point, right, we really want to make sure that these tools are proven and that they really work in the context of these 4 developments. And we've already gotten one very large grant to help us do that as we think about that sort of future funding though. So, but yes, a lot of these ideas are very relevant globally.
Thank you, Leigh.
Okay, thank you.